Testing, 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 testing. Try this again. Testing, 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 testing. Oh, that sounds like there's a gain here. All right. So I think you're trying to start here. So if you can kind of start sitting, that'd be good. And I think we need to do some like a garbage heap compaction, right? If you see some, you know the drill, your Java. Hopefully, we are doing enough of Java Ruby here, so you know the drill, right? If you see the empty seat on the next, you need to do heap compaction, meaning you need to move to the right or move to the side. So it's create some space for the other people who are trying to use that. So yeah, push all the way to the wall side. So that the other people can sit in, that'd be great. All right, so today, I guess I get to sort of do a little bit of MC. So I'm Kosuke, and Creator Jenkins. I'm gonna start this night by talking about the Jenkins TO, introducing the pipeline, do a bit of the high-level pitch, and then the Mark is gonna come in next, and he's gonna talk a bit more details about the pipeline, the Artifactory integration, and why he likes the pipeline as I understand it. So, and you have food and beer. So thank you very much, first of all, for JFrog for hosting this event. I have this facility, I go back with JFrog for quite a while, so it's a joy to be able to. This is the first time I do this event in this facility, so I'm really enjoying it. So. So the first thing, so I wanted to, so let me get started. So I've been doing this project for quite long now. In fact, I think it's more than, it started in 2004, so I've been doing it almost like a decade. So it is for me is like another child. This is my this is my biggest son. I think that maybe a year or two ago, we celebrated this mark in which we passed the 100,000 Jenkins installations around the world. So we have this usage statistics that helps us track how many instances are running there. And we are using that information to learn how we can make Jenkins better. So on that opportunity, sort of gave us this good marking point. Like usually, so ever since I started Jenkins, it's been on this weekly release cadence, right? So just like a clockwork, every Sunday, we have a new release of Jenkins coming out. So right now, I went up to like all the way to 1.640 something, and I really was ready to see the Jenkins on the Guinness Book of World Record, but I guess never failed to notice me. And then now it's 2. something, and the 2.40, I think, is the current releases. So, that kind of puts you into this like a fairly incremental mindset, right? So what is the next bug fix we need to do? What's the next, rough edges we need to remove? So it's like 100,000 installation kind of gave me the opportunity to step back and think about what we really need to do in a more longer arc of the time span, it's kind of relevant partly because it used to be this thing was my hobby project on the weekend, after my day job at Sun. But now, we have CloudBees, the company, around, and I have a lot of leverage inside the company, and we have a lot of smart people to kind of, put on the project. So the things we can do in the project has drastically improved, right? So it's really sort of, that was one of the background in which I wanted to think about where to calibrate the project forward for, let's say, next decade. And speaking of that topic, maybe this is a bit of self-advertisement, but I find it really useful to talk to the users of the Jenkins and understand in what context my software is being used. Originally, when I wrote Jenkins, I was writing this so that my colleagues can use it and get a little more productive. So I intimately knew the context, the environment in which the software was used, and that really helped me calibrate the software in the right way. And so I have a lot of people, here today, and I think you have your own set of challenges about moving this automation forward, driving this productivity boost in the software development. So if you're interested in giving me your insights and like how the sort of lay of the land about, how your world works and how you develop the software, I'm very happy to pay a visit to your company. I'd like to do some interview and that will really help me sort of calibrate the project for the future. So if you're interested in helping me do the interview, so drop me a note at kk@coscale.org so that we can arrange this. I'm really looking forward to be able to do that. So anyway, so what I was saying, I was saying that I have a lot bigger leverage to drive the project. Jenkins project is capable of doing more things. What's important for the coming decade? So when I think about the challenges that's facing our industry as a whole, I think it's very multifaceted, meaning there are lots of sort of a bigger trend at play and a sort of persistent large-scale problems that we still need to challenge. So I wanted to kind of walk through some of these heads of this hydra, the multi-headed challenge, and then sort of talk about how I see that and then what we are doing in the Jenkins project to address that. So I think the first one that I wanted to start with is the challenge that I think the broader challenge that faces our industry is this ever-expanding scope of automation. Again, back then when I started, what became Jenkins, my motivation was pretty simple. Like I had a cron job that runs my build every night, check out the source code from CVS, run Unscript. That was how we did things back in the day. So I have a little pocket of automation, and here I wrote that in the black dot that I wanted to put up on Jenkins so that I can see the result, my colleagues can see the result, and it meticulously run it like a clockwork. And then as I did that, I had the QA people in the team, and they had similar small need for automation. His current job was not to build, but to pick up the binary that was built and then run the test suite and email the test results so that the next morning he can see it and communicate the result back to the rest of the team. So he finds this useful to do this little bit of automation for what he wanted to do. So there was another small pocket of automation he was trying to do. And just like that, everyone has those tiny pockets of automation that they find something in there that they could use Jenkins for. But over time, once we automated some easy pieces, like in my case, the build and unit test, we start, it doesn't stop there, right? You slowly add more and more automation to the mix. So what happens over time is like, okay, now I can run the build, so well, I might as well also run the code coverage or the static code analysis, like a find bugs report or whatever. So I kept putting more and more things onto it. And then I think, so in some sense, this is what's really driving the growth of Jenkins. It's like you automate one thing, and the next thing you do is not like, my job is done here, but keep putting more things to automate. Because it's like a never-ending onion peeling. You always have the next layer you could automate. So I think this is somewhat anecdotal, but if you also look at the survey that we've done with the users, you see that they by and large they collaborate the same story. So when we ask your usage of Jenkins, has that increased or decreased? Pretty much everyone says it has increased, and not a single soul said it has decreased from where it was. Similarly, as they put more things into Jenkins, they saw that the mission criticalness of Jenkins has increased. So as late, I guess I got this number wrong. So by 2013, already 83% of people felt this is pretty mission critical system, but that number is increasing. And I think that if you look at how your software development happens, right? In fact, the people committing source code into repository, like a Git repository, is really now a very tiny part of it. And then there's a whole chain of automation that starts from there that's actually pretty critical for getting that changes delivered into production or turning into shippable binary. So I think hopefully it resonates well with you. And then also the kind of things that the people use Jenkins for. Again, originally, like the bread and butter of Jenkins is build and test, but we see more and more people doing deployment and operations, so on in Jenkins. As a result of that, the 11% of the people had said, their entire deployment chain has been automated, scripted on Jenkins. And then the other 30% of the people are kind of working toward that with still some parts being manually done. contrasted with the 60% of people who are using Jenkins quote unquote CI only, which is, I guess, presumably, like a build and test execution, but not much more than that. So I think there's this clear trend among our users and industry as a whole to move from this very narrowly scoped view of automation, which we might call continuous integration, to the broader scale automation that encompasses a lot more called CD. So, so knowing this, so this migration, I think this shift is still happening. Like I said, there's always more to automate. And, depending on, some of you might have achieved very sophisticated automation, but I know there's still, very mundane challenges. There's always more things that's challenging you, right? So that's, I think, one of the shifts that I see today. I think another shift, another sort of a broader trend that's going on in the industry is, okay, for the lack of better concise term, what I think of as a more code, less GUI, less state, and sort of in an attempt to capture like a state or the configuration of a running system into, well, the source code form or the text file form. So why do we want to do this? There's a number of obvious benefits, and I think the easiest place to picture this is the infrastructure as code. I think that's probably the term that's coined the longest ago. So why are people interested in doing it, right? One, for example, it brings the transparency to changes. So that you have a history all the way going back, knowing who changed what for what purposes, and you can, relatively easily go back. Another thing with this a commit history is that it allows you to capture intent of the changes. I think many of you, have this. I think this all too often when I go see people's Jenkins instances, some of the people in the team are feeling like my Jenkins instance is bit of a snowflake and they are afraid of touching it. So there's only one or two guys in the company that feel comfortable tweaking the configuration of Jenkins, and everyone else is basically just proxying changes through them. And that's partly because all they get to see is the outcome of how things are put together, and then you really don't understand what's the intent that's sort of doing this. So you're always afraid of making a little changes because you don't know exactly why it's done that way. So you'll be naturally afraid of making changes. Now, with the source code, if the configuration like that is in the source code, you could the commit messages to help you understand who did what for what purposes. So maybe that was meant to be a temporary weekend hack so that the Joe can head back home on Friday night, in which case you probably feel a little more comfortable making changes. And another part of the motivation behind turning more things into the code is just to avoid repetition, right? The more number of things we deal with, the more number of servers, more number of jobs, more number of build agents, whatever, the configuring those individually through GUI becomes very painful. So the big part of the configuration as code or the infrastructure as code or whatever is so that you could avoid repeating yourself. And then so that's part of what helps you deal with large scale. So, like I said, the infrastructure as code, putting those definitions into the Git repository like Chef and Puppet, I think that's obviously where this is very common. But I think more and more we have, things like Wiki is now in Git, thanks to GitHub. A lot of configuration of the systems is now in Git, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a very broad trend that's happening across many different things. So if you observe those two problems, the one that is that the domain of automation is expanding ever and ever, and then two, there's more desire to capture more things into source code in ways that are transparent. So what are we doing in Jenkins to cope with that? And that's the one of the key motivations behind this pipeline system that we've introduced maybe about a year ago or so. So what is this system that you're doing? So one motivation, one of the things that the Jenkins pipeline enables you to do is to it's a one system that helps you describe from the simplest possible, say CI job, just run this Ant script and then send the email, all the way up to more complex deployment pipeline. Let's say the one that involves multiple environments, deployment, running tests, and some approvals in the between. previously, there's very steep gap in the paradigm. So the Jenkins has this notion of job, like freestyle job, that's for doing very simple automations. And then anything else you try to do above is basically combining those in some strange ways, like upstream, downstream links, parameterized trigger plugin, or whatever. And that's where different people take different approaches and kind of struggle a little in this a wonderland of phantom plugins. So now Jenkins pipeline is one system that takes you through all that journey, and it keeps it stays with you throughout the whole course. So you don't have to change the paradigm as you grow from the automation from simple to complex. And the second part is the whole thing is text-based. So you're defining the instruction of the build, right? So things like my source code is here. I need to run this build on this kind of build agents. Here's a shell script I need to run to the test, and here's where the test reports are, and I need email to be sent there. All that instruction, it's going to go on the text file, and then to be placed inside the same source code repository as your source code is. So that makes it a lot more sort of manageable, and I talked about the benefit of that in the previous slides. And another motivation is by this being the text, you can handle lots of similar jobs without repeating yourself. So we have means to capture the commonality between different jobs into the same parts, so that if you are in the large organization, chances are pretty good that you have some sort of standardized, established practices of how to, let's say, build a deployment pipeline. So everyone in the team, so long as they are following the process, they don't need to be Jenkins experts. They just need to pass in a few parameters that are different from one team to another, like maybe email addresses, and everything else can be captured in this common part, right? So that keeps things very dry. Another thing we did, since this is a major new subsystem in Jenkins, we took the effort to make this pipeline job survive the restart of Jenkins. So, if you have managed Jenkins in the past, you know that if you restart the Jenkins, for example, to install a new version of plugin or something, you have to wait until all the jobs kind of clear the queue, because that would disrupt the building progress. So what that translates to is you staying up late in the office in the Friday night in the hopes that things would quiet down. So we fix that in Pillow. You can restart, the master can blow up, you can update the plugin, or you could temporarily lose communication between master and build agent for a while. But so long as the actual work that you're doing, like a Maven process or the Rake or whatever is running on the right build agent, as soon as Jenkins comes back up, it remembers what it was doing elsewhere, and it'll be able to sort of reconnect to whatever that it was running. So the end result is your users will not even notice that the Jenkins has went down and come back in 2 minutes. So that I think is I think this is a great feature that we well, in some way long overdue, but we finally delivered. I think another thing that if I think about sort of what drove the success of Jenkins, I think the part of it is this ecosystem of plugins in which each plugin is kind of a codified best practices of how some organization has approached this problem, right? It's a really convenient unit of reuse. So I have some plugins like a promoted builds plugin, in which I basically essentially codified how some microsystem was doing the software development. So there's some wisdom behind those methodologies. And then when the community shared these plugins together, and then you reuse it, what you're doing is sort of building on top of the other people's effort to get there quickly. And I think nowadays, the thing that really needs to be used is this knowledge and hard-earned knowledge about how to compose these pipelines, where the different pieces fit together, that sort of thing. So so in pipeline, we built this system that allowed sort of a reuse of different parts, and I'm hoping that we could expand it up, across different teams inside the organization or beyond different organizations, within the whole entire Jenkins community, so that we can sort of bring the use of Jenkins to the next level. And you can again piggyback on this. You can build on top of the shoulder of other people to get to the goal pretty quickly. So. So here's what the here's how it's gonna look, how it looks like in terms of how you define the instruction for the pipeline build. So you know, so what it's saying is, okay, we need this build to be running with the build agent that has the Java 8 level. All right, the stage is really just a visual group to group things together. So in this case, like every stage only have one thing to do. So, you know, it's a little bit stupid, but you know what I'm doing here. So first I check out the source code into the workspace, and then I run the Maven install process. And then I run some test scripts that, you know, kicks off the test, and at the end of it, I archive the jar file, and then that's the end of it. So by having this stage as a grouping, like, you know, when it fails, you can really quickly see which phase, which stage of your pipeline things have gone wrong. Well, I guess so you could capture this in the source. So you place these files inside the Git repository by using the name Jenkins file, and then in that way, that helps Jenkins to pick things up. So with something like this, with a convention like this, it really makes it easy to pick up, you know, to configure Jenkins. So imagine, so this Jenkins Inc. is like a made-up demo organization on GitHub for the purpose of illustrating the power of Jenkins too. So imagine like this is a company, you know, probably many of you are using GitHub. They have an organization, you probably have a lot of repositories. So the only thing you have to tell Jenkins is where your GitHub organization is, right? And then you add this Jenkins file that I explained a little bit earlier into your source code repository. And then you just need to sit back and watch that Jenkins takes notice that, oh, there's this Jenkins file in this branch in this repository. That probably means you want me to do something about it. So it automatically, now this is a, you know, it picks up, it notices that you have the GitHub org, you have 3 repositories that has Jenkins file, and then it, you know, it automatically set up the job for you. And it recognizes every interesting branches in it. So let's say in this module, I have 3 branches, the dev branch and staging branch and production branch. So it automatically recognizes that, oh, okay, you have those 3 branches that you're interested in. So it gives you 3 separate jobs. So you know, their build history will be nicely separated into different branch. You didn't have to you didn't have to touch anything. So the only configuration you did was from once to configure where the GitHub organization is. And in that way, every time someone pushes a new change, then you build it automatically trigger, and you get to see this pipeline visualization where you can see these different stages showing up on the column, and then different builds on the rows. You can see that what changes who has made on this side, and like a time it took to run some stuff. So it's pretty quickly obvious, like when the failure happened, what went wrong. And if you click it, you see the build log that's like just from that stage, and quick pin down the failure. And I didn't mention, but just the cherry on top of the cake is like you also get like a pull request integration right out of the box, right? So in this repository, every time someone opens a new pull request, it gets built, the result gets communicated back to GitHub. So you kind of get this cutting edge, more sophisticated automation automatically happening around you without you doing anything with Jenkins, just by the fact of doing this one configuration. So it's really great for, you know, keeping your busy product developer more productive, because you're not asking them to come to Jenkins at all. Like the right things happen around them automatically. And that's really like the whole reason I named Jenkins after a butler, right? I want it to be some capable guy who do the right thing before you ask. So I'm really sort of proud and happy about this feature that we've added in Jenkins too. So one of the downside of the Jenkins file being a text file is that it's a blank canvas, right? So you have to edit that in the VI or Emacs, and unless you know what it is, you don't know what you want to have to type. So we added a lot of, you know, support and feature inside the Jenkins itself to help you get started on writing Jenkins file. So this is in place. This is the sort of editor screen of the Jenkins, where you can sort of type in the pipeline script. So here, for example, in an attempt to get to some like a non-empty starting point, you can select some pre-canned examples. So here I have the Hello World, but you can also get something like the one that I showed you in a few slides earlier. And another thing we give you is this in-place pipeline syntax that sort of helps you see the available syntax. Another thing we provide is this snippet generator. So what it does is, it's kind of like an in-between from this traditional freestyle-ish configuration approach in which you have the text field, you have drop down, and so if you can click around a few things, you sort of get the idea of what Jenkins is capable to do, and what are the input that Jenkins is asking you, right? So, if you use a snippet generator, and this is available inside Jenkins as well, and then if you click down this drop down, you get the option of available things that your Jenkins has, and then as you select the right command, it gives you all the other options, and then if you type those and click the button, it spits out a fragment of the pipeline definition that you can then cut and paste into your Jenkins file. So this kind of is sort of like a, this helps you sort of like a step-by-step construct your Jenkins file without looking at the reference manual or anything like that. And obviously, we also have a reference manual because we need it for certain reasons. People need it for various reasons. So that's also available inside the Jenkins itself. And then it's small enough to recognize the set of the plugins that you have. So you have the exact right set of command and the instructions and their options in this system available so that you can see those. So that's the kind of the basics of the Jenkins file. And then I show some of the basic examples, but that was very trivial one. So let's look at some of what I consider the power features. Right? So imagine if you add this Docker pipeline plugin, which is one of the pipeline extension plugin that's been popular. Then every time you add this new plugin, you get a set of new capability. I apologize that the indentation is messed up a little, I think. So what I'm doing, so I have this a variable created to use. This is a tag name for the Docker image that so I can do this kind of thing thanks to the capability of Jenkins file. And I'm going to need to run this on the build agent that has the Docker as the label. So I checked out the source code. And this is going to be the tag that I create because I want to bake the build number in it. So I have some variable expansion going on here. And then the build says, so this Docker pipeline plugin add this new variable, new sort of namespace that's called Docker in this field pipeline. So you can do the build of the new container and then take the resulting image and push that into a Docker registry. So what's the benefit of doing this as opposed to, let's say, running a whole bunch of shell script? Well, we handle things like credential bindings and other sort of peripheral support to make sort of things work a little better. Another great example, and this one is really not to really show off why this is better beyond the command line, a whole bunch of shell script. In this example, what I'm doing is I want to run this Gradle build, and then to do so, I want to use this what I call the tool container. Right? The Docker image that contains the right version of Java, the version of Gradle, or the warmed up cache, that sort of thing. So I'm telling Jenkins to, hey, I run this on this Docker, the build agent that's at the Docker level, but run the container whose name is OpenJDK in version 8, and inside this container, run these commands. I'm checking out the source code inside this container, run the Gradle build, and then archive the artifacts, and then when I leave the scope, that container goes away. So in that way, you can really maintain this kosher build environment without tainting your build agent. So you could decouple the responsibility of creating the right set of tools to the application developer. And the Jenkins admin, you don't have to deal with every single little request that you need this version of Ruby, or this version of Python, or this version of Java. So something like this is really hard to do with shell script, but with the power of the Jenkins pipeline, you could do that. And the list of the plugins that support pipeline is expanding by day. So we have lots of tool-related stuff, export the credential support, the SSH agent, or the ability to run tests in parallel. Artifactory is obviously one of those, and the Mark is going to be talking more about that. We have the report comprehension, JUnit, HTML publisher, whatever. And then, as always, we have the good part of the CI/CD is about telling people. So we have a great set of notification support. posting messages on the Slack channel or the HipChat. And then some other miscellaneous things like putting a timestamp, the timeout, the version control plugin, all that stuff. And we have the more details of it, and the structuring here, and a lot of community plugins are in process of being updated. So yeah, let's just show some of those. So here, for example, I'm scoping this timestamp into this part, right? So I really only care about the timestamp for the slow Maven part. So let's get that. Or when you deploy the final result into the target system, I need to have the SSH agent ready so that I have this SSH key to connect to the production server. So by having this scope like that, we'll be able to sort of segregate those, compose this capability much more nicely, right? So that's one of the challenges in the freestyle is like every time you want to just narrow these copies, so create the variables, like it introduces yet another way of doing things. Now this really is like a one system that's amenable. And it's also like a host language. This is a DSL hosted on Groovy, so you can do all the user programming stuff like conditional statement or loop and so on. And that's really a powerful capability. I think this is the last part of the pipeline section in which I wanted to talk a little bit about the use and how to share things. So let's imagine like you have a particular way of running Maven, right? So you created the custom container that has the right settings of the XML, some warmed up proxy, the right version of the JDK, the Node.js because you use the Maven frontend plugin or whatever. And then you want to kick off this Maven process. You have the corporate standard process in which you have to have some options and run this command and archive the JUnit. So things like that, you could package that up as a one file and then put that into the version control system and tell Jenkins that, hey, I have this common library I want to use from elsewhere. Then go pay attention to that. And Jenkins is like, okay, I understand that. Okay, you're calling this little bit of chunk of fragment called run Maven. And with that inside the Jenkins file, you could use this run Maven as if that was a part of the built-in part of the Jenkins. So if you're a product developer that's not Jenkins expert, then you don't really need to know like which part is built into Jenkins, which part is local to you. So this is a very trivial example because I only abstracted away how to run Maven. But you could imagine if your company has the standardization is very well progressed, then you can almost make the entire thing parameterized, and the only Jenkins file is like a 1 line or 2 lines that has key parameters in it. So that would be a really powerful notion because it's almost like just some magic, like a 2-line thing that you write in there, and everything else happens in the right way. And as soon as somebody modifies this definition, then every job that's created in that similar way instantly change the way they work. So you got a great dryness as well. So that's the kind of the power, the quick overview of the power of the pipeline. And a lot of other efforts has noticed that the Jenkins is putting significant effort into it. So one of the Red Hat project called Fabricate, it kind of adds the power of the Kubernetes and then try to build this like a ready-to-made CD solution. They built their sort of the entire thing on Jenkins pipeline. So this is a kind of thing. I find this as a good illustration of where the world of software development is heading with the Dockers and Kubernetes and the CD pipeline like Jenkins. So you might be interested in checking it out. All right, so that was kind of like a wrong, so where was I? I was talking about all the different challenges that face our industry, right? So the next sort of challenge that I wanted to talk about, especially facing Jenkins, is the speeding of assembly required. If you install a fresh Jenkins, it's actually pretty vanilla. It doesn't really do anything useful by itself. You have to install a whole bunch of plugins just to get some basic things going. And it wasn't like that before. And in the past, when I started what became Jenkins, everyone was using either CVS and cutting edge people are using Subversion. So when you install Jenkins back then, you get Subversion and CVS support both out of the box. So that was great. But now fast forward in 2017, nobody's using CVS, and if you're using Subversion, like you'd say that really awkwardly because you feel like you're behind the curve, right? So we kind of needed to up the game. So in Jenkins 2, we made things better from the beginning. Like we wanted to give some, we wanted to own more space so that like you are immediately productive out of the box. So we decided that, okay, we wanted support, like we realized that a lot of people are doing some pretty exotic stuff on Jenkins. I once heard from some people who are using Jenkins to control the webcam so that it takes a picture of their clip every single second. And they did this OpenCV, like an image comparison of the image, and they set the movement, it sends out the email. So that's one example of the crazy usage. But with that said, there should be some 80% use case that covers the vast majority of people. So we wanted to sort of make that really accessible out of the box, and then guide the user also to the best practices by sort of showing the best face of the community plugins. Because often another common problem I think you've seen is that there are a lot of seemingly lots of different plugins that seems to do the same thing, right? So as a user, like you feel like, okay, you're asking me to choose these 3 things, but I'm a new user. Like I don't want to choose. Like tell me what's the best thing for me. So that kind of leads into sort of the Jenkins 2, this the installation experience. So if you install Jenkins 2 for the first time, instead of getting to the familiar screen, we ask you to go through this quick and simple setup wizard in which you can install what we suggest as the best practices. So in this way, what used to be Jenkins was like a bucket full of Lego blocks. We have the 1,000+ plugins that you can combine into any single thing. So back then, when CI/CD was a cutting-edge thing, the people who are doing it had strong ideas and opinions about how they want to do it. So the fact that you can take these building blocks and compose them into just the right shape for you has been a great asset. But as this becomes more and more things for the masses, what people are asking more now is like, okay, give me some reasonable car that I can get started. And you can get some good mileage out of it. And once you get used to it, once you kind of get the hang of it, then you just start thinking about, well, okay, I need a sunroof here. I'm going to swap out the passenger seat, and so on and so forth. And the entire ecosystem of Jenkins enables you to do that, right? But we allow you to sort of push off that decision until the point in which you feel comfortable. We have some other sort of benefit on the developer side about this. For one is like, the support burden in the community of dealing with this arbitrary combination of plugins has been pretty hard, right? So now with this common best set of the practices, we can spend more effort focused on this particular, winning combination. So that's something that allows us to rally the community behind. And another thing, another inherent problem of the modular system is like, because people develop plugins independently, sometimes it happens if you put them together, the end result is not always sensible because again, those independent plugins are developed differently. So like, we discovered, for example, like when you install a set of like a good GitHub plugin, the system configuration page end up getting 3 separate places to configure GitHub entries because, those 3 plugins are written by different people. So that's allowing us in the community to rally behind things like, we need to consolidate this setting. And those kind of things are only possible after we have this clear borderline, which says we have this recommended set of plugins. And again, if you have a reader functionality off the top of right off the bat, then that will also help us to this sort of, create this well-lit path. So like I said, previously, because there are so many slightly different ways that have slightly different trade-off, our answer always are somewhat nuanced. Well, if you're using this plugin, you're going to do it this way, but if you're using the other plugin, you're going to be doing slightly different ways. So there's a lot of dark alley in which you can get robbed, and it hurts you. Right? So now we are trying to create like a one path, well, not exactly one, but a smaller set of paths that's well lit. And then, so we have, for example, the documentation effort is going on now. We have a dedicated email list and people working on, capturing sort of like a good set of documentation built around this beautiful, recommended set of functionalities. So I think that's, I think those things Might be a little less sexy, but I think it drives a great benefit to pretty much every user. And then another one of those like a less sexy but really useful is the idea of protecting Jenkins users. Is that Jenkins is an app that runs on the network, and it's an application that forks off lots of processes left and right. So it's really almost like a remote code execution defined as an application, right? So the only thing that's protecting Jenkins is the proper access control. So we kind of became a big target for the people who are trying to take over your computers. So, for example, in the last year, we saw that some bots that specifically targeting a known vulnerability in Jenkins, and then so it's a worm that's scanning different ports. I mean, this known vulnerable URL in the attempt to control that Jenkins instance. So, in the project, we decided that we need to really up the game in protecting the Jenkins users. So we have the security team now. We've streamlined the processes between the security team and the release team so that we can release the security advisories and fixes in some coordinated manner and give you some heads up that the fix is coming. We work with other upstream organizations to obtain the security, CVE IDs. Basically, like we are trying to do the proper things to become like a responsible citizen of the internet community. And in Jenkins 2, we took this one step further by sort of tweaking some default set of changes, the features in such a way that it is more secure by default. So we have some of the options that's enabled by default on by default, whereas previously it wasn't the case, in the hope of reducing or eliminating the number of Jenkins that's out there that's vulnerable. So, and that effort has been going on. And lastly, the Jenkins, when we say the major number increase too, like sometimes signals the backward incompatibility. But when the main reason we named Jenkins as 2 is not because it's incompatible. It's actually rather quite backward compatible, but rather to signal the fact that we are adding lots of, we have a lot more strategic thinking going on behind the key pieces in Jenkins 2, and the fact that we are sort of, shifting the focus into different area like pipeline. So it is very much compatible. It is more or less like, your upgrade process, and I recognize that sometimes that's not as smooth as it should be. But there's nothing specifically you should be afraid of to update Jenkins 2. You really should think of it as a part of the regular update cycle. So that's the sort of like an overview of the Jenkins 2. Now I need to kind of quickly I could stop here, but I wanted to really talk a little bit about what's coming beyond 2. So if you bear with me for a few more minutes, I wanted to sort of touch upon some of the exciting projects that the Jenkins project is working on now that we have shipped Jenkins 2. So the first one is the user experience. So this is actually the earliest screenshot that I could find of what became Jenkins. It's kind of, I think it's like a 1.18 or something. You see some name of the project that they're working on. It kind of more or less feel, you can already see the beginning of the Jenkins. Now, this is what we shipped in 2. So, for example, like in the configuration page, we made a lot of improvements, like these tab bar, like a scroll spies and tab bars that help you jump to the right places. This more clear grouping around things, and delete button clearly indicating what's impacted, and etc. But nonetheless, all these changes are very incremental, right? This is a server-generated HTML. That's how things were done back in a decade ago. But nowadays, the web technology has really moved on, and the whole way we do things, it's kind of becoming difficult to keep making the incremental changes on top of it. So somewhere last year, we decided that okay, we need to sort of take a drastically different approach. Instead of making more and more incremental changes, let's sort of step back, design the whole thing from scratch, and build sort of, let's forget about all the backward compatibility constraint or like the existing way of doing things. What the user, let's completely rethink the way we deal with Jenkins UX. We want to focus on like what the developers, how people interact with Jenkins, rather than just dumping you with all the information we have, right? So that's what became the Blue Ocean project, in the hope of like extending into the brand new directions. So our initial target is like a more narrowly, like a modestly focused around the developer user experience, read-only developer user experience around the pipeline. So you can see all these builds and the branches and pipelines in a convenient manner. But our goal is no less than taking over the entire user interface surface of Jenkins over time. It is a big system. One other thing I love about this is the personalized. So you can sort of favor, you can mark your jobs that you care about. If the builds that has your changes is failed, it kind of gives you a high visibility on those. Also, just like any other project in Jenkins, this is a highly extensible system that allows plugins to expand it. So we are in the, and then we have this design language, the component library to help plugins write the consistent UI. So just kind of wanted to give you a quick look on what that is. All right, which is not, so let's see. So how I'm going to do this, is that like that? All right, so this is the demo instance that we ran for ourselves. And if you look at, so this is building all the Jenkins, like a Blue Ocean related project, and specifically the interesting one is Blue Ocean. So you can see all the recent build that's going on across different branches. So in this project, we have a feature branches for interesting tickets. So you can see all this activity happening. You can sort of clear things around across different branches. If you have a pending pull request, those build status is already visible. So let's say, oh, looks like that has failed. So what has failed? Like you immediately see this, the section of the failure, and then the logs. You can also see, let me go back to the one that actually has worked. And you also have familiar things like the artifacts that, or the changes in the source tree, or the tests that have run. So the things that sort of, help you. So the things that help the developers become productive is kind of in there. And hopefully you can see that it's a really different, it's a completely different way we are taking as opposed to what we've been historically doing. So that's the sort of quick teaser on the Blue Ocean. And how do I put it away? I'm usually a Linux guy, so like I have a bit of struggle to make this work. I had to use a Mac to do the PowerPoint stuff, and I lost. Oh my god. I don't have my presenter view here, so let's see. All right, maybe I'll have to just do the rest of it by watching it here. So Blue Ocean, so right now Blue Ocean is in the beta phase, right? So we think it's pretty stable and it's actually ready to use on your production instances. But we are calling it beta because we didn't want to fix the API for the other plugins. So we are in the phase where we want to get the feedbacks from the users about what it does, so that we can still make some tweaks and breaking changes inside the code in the contract before we call it 1.0. And then we expect to be able to ship 1.0 in the, I believe, the first quarter of 2017, which is almost there. So now that I think about it, I'm getting scared. Yes, it is in Q1 already. So that's great UX effort. And the pipeline, our work is not done just because we ship Jenkins 2. So the next round of effort is focusing on around simplifying the definition of the pipeline even further, so that we can easily explain it and then people can easily get it, right? We have, as I show in some of these earlier slides, it's got all the power to do very complicated stuff, and then power users know how to use it already, so that's fine. But we also don't want people to be creating too many strange Jenkins files that's hard to maintain. So we wanted to define this well-defined, curated subset that works very well. So that kind of speaks to this next point about no more snowflake Jenkins, which is I want people doing similar pipeline to end up writing similar Jenkins files, so that everyone, like people new to Jenkins or people new to the company, can see Jenkins file and they're like, okay, I understand this. This is easy enough. As opposed to how do they do this in this company, right? And in this is also our attempt to get to the point and click audience in which some people really do feel comfortable with the GUI. Like maybe they are maybe they are less technical. Like often I see those in the QA people. So I wanted to be able to define the GUI to help people edit Jenkins file, kind of like in the freestyle configuration page. But the end result is the Jenkins file, not the XML file in the Jenkins home somewhere. The end result is Jenkins file in your version control system. So I wanted also the Jenkins file to look less like programming, but more declarative. Some other properties like the immediate obvious error recovery of the failure as when Jenkins reads it, as opposed to blowing up in the middle of the pipeline execution. So this work is also in progress, here's like a sort of like a sneak peek on what we are doing. So this is what is this saying? It's saying like, okay, I want to run this build inside the Docker agent, and then by using this container as a node, and we have two stages and running two shell scripts in the middle. So so it's very easily readable, and you can see that this is clearly like a pipeline, not that different from the Jenkins file that I explained earlier. But this is the kind of simplification that we think going to drive a lot of improvements. And we have some common idioms that everyone defined a set of environment variables to be used throughout. So let's define that as first-class citizen with nice syntax. So you might have a environment variable like source username and source password if you're using source dev. So the username is here, and then you can sort of fetch the password from the credential support in Jenkins so that Jenkins file doesn't have to hard code a sensitive secret. Another common thing is like a notification. So, you want to notify the email. If you wanted to send an email notification in case of a failure, you can write some declarative instruction like that, and then get the job done. And so this kind of common pattern is much easier to write here. So really, like what I'm trying to do is I want to create this like a well-curated garden, that nice garden that you can stay safe inside, but it's also got the door that leads to the back, right? So if you needed the downside of this garden is that it's got the wall and you're confined into this small space. So long as the use case fit within this need, you're okay. But once your needs start to grow, well, you can open the door up to basically tap into the full capability of the Jenkins pipeline, including these, the conditional statement, variable, whatever. So you can get the best of both worlds without, jumping from one paradigm to another. So, and then we are building more ease of use features around it. So we are working on the more documentations, the better error handling, the security sandbox improvements is something I really want to see soon. And also the language discrepancy with the host DSL capability of the Groovy. So that's the kind of thing that we are working on. So in summary, so the Jenkins 2 is really where I wanted to kind of get you. It's the thing that I want you to think about as we head home today. So we added the pipeline as code as a key thing, and the user interface improvement is another part of it. So I show you the configuration forms and so on. And we have more curated out-of-the-box experience to steer people in the best practice path, and we are upping the game in the security. So that's, all that is to say, like we are really sort of taking like a more long-term, there's a lot of like a long-term thinking behind some of these efforts and more things to come in all of these spaces. So that's it for the Jenkins 2 and pipeline. So I guess I should, bring the Mark up here and maybe push the Q&A at the end. With two of us on stage, how is that?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So it's
all yours.
Yeah. Okay. New headsets. I'm probably not wearing it right, am I? Yeah. Okay, I'll try to fix that. That works better. Give me just a second to set up my laptop. Thank you very much. So, getting told you're speaking after the founder of Jenkins is always a little bit intimidating. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what I should talk about. There's lots of exciting things to talk about when it comes to the combination of Artifactory and Jenkins. For one thing, it's been going on for a very long time. Display, I guess that would help. There we go. It's been going on for a long time. I'm not gonna, I considered actually talking a lot about sort of the history of it, and decided instead that what I wanted to talk about is my journey over the last year since JFrog started working with pipelines. I've had the privilege of kind of taking the cutting edge of doing some sort of, fun reference implementations of, more complex use cases, and why I've liked doing that with pipelines. So first, before I get too much into that, my name is Mark Galpin. I'm a senior solution engineer at JFrog. I can be found on GitHub or Twitter or whatever. For those of you who may not be familiar with JFrog, first of all, welcome to our office. We've been around for a while. We were founded in Israel about almost 10 years ago now. We now have an office here in the United States. You can see that this picture was old when our office was much, much smaller and had many fewer people in it. But it's actually only from a year ago. And we also have a smaller office in France, which is growing very rapidly. And as you probably noticed, just wandering around our office, we're obsessed with the color green and with frogs. But we actually do some very serious technical stuff. We don't just have fun with cool frog pictures. Although, if you have a cool frog picture, tweet it at us. We'll love you for it. So what do we actually do? So we make a product called Artifactory, which is kind of our flagship product, and it acts as a universal artifact repository. And basically, since I just followed a long, wonderful talk on Jenkins, what I'm going to say is build it in Jenkins, put it in Artifactory. And then have Jenkins take it back out of Artifactory to do the next thing. And that's pretty much what Artifactory is about. And we have another large flagship product called JFrog Bintray. For those of you in the Java community, you may be familiar with JCenter. That's hosted on Bintray as a large Maven repository and has Android libraries in it and that sort of thing. But also, it's used by non-open source users to distribute binaries of various types, not just Maven, but Docker and NPM and Python and even generic packages of various types. If you need to get a binary out to the entire globe and you want to know where it went, Bintray is that tool. And we also have kind of two products that kind of work with those products. JFrog Mission Control is just about scaling, really scaling the JFrog platform out to large global users. You can have an Artifactory everywhere and track it with small teams of people that actually have to manage some sort of global architecture. And our newest product is JFrog Xray. And JFrog Xray is component analysis. We've always been about collecting binaries and collecting metadata on binaries, and JFrog Xray kind of allows us to take that to the next level. And a little bit of what I'll talk about today will involve a little bit about adapting some of our work with Jenkins to involve Xray. And we'll show you a snapshot build of that because it's coming out sometime this month, maybe even next week. I always take release dates from R&D with just a grain of salt because we want it to be right. So But I said I'd start with, why do I like pipelines? And like anything else that happens in the DevOps community, things you like start with things you didn't like. So about this time last year, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Docker. I really love DevOps, and like anybody who really loves DevOps, I really like Docker. For Christmas, as a family project, my dad and I installed Docker for Windows, and I taught my dad how to use Docker. So, in order to accelerate his development cycle. So, so yeah, so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, what are the right ways to develop Docker so that you can do not just have it be a toy, but have it be something that can go out to production. And our JFrog user conference was starting to come up, and I wanted to talk a lot about it. And so I wanted to build a DevOps pipeline that would get you from, building the Docker containers to deploying them, and string all that together for, build an entire application, put it up in a Docker container, and ship it. How many of you, by the way, are already users of Jenkins? And how many of you are users of Artifactory? Okay, so most of you have used both. And how many of you use the Jenkins Artifactory plugin? It's a little bit distressing to me that that is not actually identical to everybody who raised their hands both times. But hopefully this may persuade you to change your mind. If you're persuaded that pipelines are great, I'm going to say that Artifactory's integrations with pipelines is going to be a lot of fun. So when it came to Docker, if some of you have heard somebody from JFrog speak about Docker in the last year, before, you've probably seen some variant of this picture, which basically, posits the idea that the first thing to having a trusted Docker container is that there has to be a distinction between Docker containers written by developers and ones that have been approved for prod. And that automation should be in charge of promoting it, and that really there should be no way for an image to get to prod without going through some sort of automated process, which presumably involves testing. And so, what does that really look like? Because what I didn't want to do is to take this really cool thing designed for speeding up development and re-implement waterfall development on it. I mean, it's possible. You can do waterfall with anything. I worked for the Army for 8 years. I assure you, you can do waterfall with anything. Yes, my Army project in 2013 won an award for being the very first Army program, software development program, to formally use spiral development. And they had to change the law in order to allow us to do that. So yeah, you can, but that's not what I was looking for. I want things that can be released every day, but I don't also want to give up on security. I want to keep stability, but I don't want to give up on security. One of the really great innovations Docker has introduced is the idea that when Ubuntu decides to patch their OS, I just pull a base layer that's pre-patched. And I stop having to worry about, OS level patches, and I don't have to go out and manually update my OS. It just does it for me. And I don't want to give that up in what I'm doing. So I had a Docker container, and it looks pretty much like lots of Docker containers. And I didn't actually do a certain application, but I was thinking about a WAR file deployed on top of Tomcat that would often be deployed in Linux environments, because that's a sort of application architecture that is on my mind a lot. For those of you who aren't aware, that's what Artifactory is. How would you do this? So I had some requirements up front. And I said, first of all, I wanted my WAR file to be tested and deployed in its container that it was going to be given out to customers in. But I want the framework to stay known good, but I want to update it regularly. And I don't want updating the framework to interfere with the developer working on the application. You know, I'll let the people that care about security and worry about infrastructure layers focus on worrying about infrastructure layers. And what should happen is that happens completely transparently to the developer. The developer just pushes his code, and magically in the background, the framework is updated underneath him. So how to do this? Well, it turns out there's a concept called sandwich testing. And the idea behind sandwich testing, it's not actually referring to layers per se, but the idea is that you test from the bottom up and you test from the top down simultaneously. And so what I wanted to do is, you know, I had this concept of developing a framework, developing an application. You see, these are called pipelines. It's kind of giving away the end. But the fact is that these two have to depend on each other. If I want to be able to push security updates regularly without breaking something, I have to test that. I can't tell you how much in the Army we used to dread the day that we got the official security patches that the Army dictated shall be installed in all machines. And you know, on at least one occasion, we installed the Army security patches, booted our software, and got a blue screen. And if you want to have automated deployment to production, you cannot allow that to happen. I had a friend in the Air Force who would say that the scariest thing, and he's not technical, he's actually a chaplain, right? So about as far from a technical discipline as you can get and be a serving officer in the United States military. And he says, yes, I dread the day that Java updates get pushed because everything breaks. And it's like, why does he even know when Java updates get pushed? So this is wrong, and you do have to test. So if you're going to test, well, you know, the first thing is that obviously your working framework has to be going into your applications. But likewise, your application, once you have a known good version of your application, before I release a new version of the framework, I should test it against preferably all the applications I'm going to install it in, or at least some very good smoke test set of what is going to be installed in. And I put that all together into a whole bunch of steps. And it looks a little bit like this. And so when I was doing this, we weren't yet using Jenkins pipelines. And this became 5 interdependent jobs. And it not only became 5 interdependent jobs, it became 5 jobs that starting them each required the other job to have run the first time. Basically. And there's still a little bit of that. You know, the natural aspect of cross-dependent pipelines is that you have to have run them the first time. And you have to tweak them just a little bit sometimes to run them the first time. But it was pretty ugly. 5 jobs. 1 to do a Gradle build, to build my WAR file. 1 to build the framework that I was doing. 1 to test the framework and start pulling in, you know, the WAR files, putting it in to run a test. 1 to build my app Docker container, and 1 to build the test for the Docker app. And the only one that I could actually pull out and keep, you know, combine into the same job was I managed to figure out I could combine Docker app and Docker app test into the same job under the old format. So this was a little bit painful. And again, all I'm trying to do is this. Now, granted, it looks like this, but still, 5 jobs. I'm building 2 things. At the end of the day, I'm building a framework build that's used by multiple jobs, and I'm building a Docker container I'm shipping to my customers. So enter the pipeline DSO. So I thought it would be kind of nice. Kosuke talked a lot about pipelines. I thought it might be kind of interesting to spend just a few minutes talking about the process of developing the Python DSL. Disclaimer here, I'm not the one who did it. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the code, but I'm not going to go too in depth. But I did spend a fair amount of time talking to the guy who implemented our most recent feature of Python DSL, which is integration with our X-Ray product. And so to explain a little bit about what he was trying to achieve, I just want to spend just a few seconds talking about what X-Ray is, because even if you're Artifactory users, it's a fairly new product, so some of you may not be familiar with it. So the idea behind X-Ray is its component analysis. So when a new package comes into Artifactory, it notifies X-Ray. X-Ray goes out, pulls down that package, and does a task we call indexing. And what indexing basically is it cracks the package open, finds its components, and then if it can, it cracks the components open, gets the subcomponents, builds out a complete graph of the components of the package. So for example, if I have a Docker container, it's going to crack that open, and inside each layer, it will find all the Debians, the RPMs, the WAR files. Inside those, there may in turn be more WAR files and jar files. Jar files, of course, can kind of be a turtles all the way down type things. You can have jars inside jars inside jars. And building out this complete component graph, which gives you, each component by its ID, by its checksum, how they relate to each other, becomes a very powerful tool for figuring out what's going on in the world of your binaries and how they relate to each other. And there are some obvious use cases of this sort of graph. Security vulnerabilities and open source licenses come to mind. This is the most common use case where other people build this sort of graph, but we actually think that there are some very powerful use cases beyond that. If you know what's in your binaries, this also enables you to do things like somebody decides there's a major performance issue with a given library, figure out who all is using it. When I worked with the Army, there were some 40 million lines of code developed by over 40 different vendors integrated into theoretically one product. And we were trying to consolidate that down and try to reuse code. And then a vendor comes to me and says, oh, Mark, I discovered I did this really serious bug that misinterpreted a bit here. And if a targeting system uses this, then they might be a couple of meters off. It's like, okay, now I need to know, very desperately, I need to know everything that uses that version of the library. Of course, if it was actually tied to a targeting system, I had stacks and stacks of paperwork that would tell me that information. But it would have been nice if there had been a somewhat more automated way of doing it than literally going through and searching my Excel spreadsheets, for the code breakdowns. So that's kind of what X-Ray is. And so we rolled this out to customers, and pretty much the first thing they said was, well, this is great, and if it does component analysis and something fails, I don't want my build to keep going. Integrate this with Jenkins. So how do we do that? Well, let's go out on GitHub and take a look. That is this one, sorry. It is now called the Jenkins Artifactory plugin, but you can see that our Jira is still called HAP. Oh, wrong screen. So it is called the Jenkins Artifactory plugin, but our Jira still calls it HAP because it's been around a really long time. And I decided I'd jump right into the pipeline section. This is out on GitHub. You're free to look at it yourself if you're looking to see a little bit about how this works. And I do want to thank some of the team at CloudBees. They helped us when we had some questions about what some best practices would be, pointed us at some things that were very useful. One of the things they helped us out with is an early realization that with the various configuration options that Artifactory enables, you didn't just want, repeated independent steps, but that in fact you do need some global variables. So we have this pipeline global class where we store the global configuration options so you can continually reuse them throughout a node. And then really from there, we just have this section called steps. And if you want to do it with Artifactory, it's a step class here. And you can go and see how we did it, whether that be a Gradle build, a Maven build, creating Artifactory servers, destroying Artifactory servers, Docker, downloading generically, whatever that is. So the new one is the X-ray scan build step. And I asked Roman, who is the committer here, how hard he thought this was. And he said, it's actually really easy to add a new step to the Jenkins DSO for pipelines. Much faster and easier for us than when we had to also try to worry about exactly how it interacted with the UI. Which allows us to bring new features out to our customers much faster. Plus, we definitely agree with pretty much everything Kosuke was saying about kind of where the market is going. And so you will see that pretty much all new features for Jenkins that JFrog is implementing are going to be focused on pipelines. Barring severe pushback from customers, which certainly we have not been getting. Pretty much most of the customers I talk to about this, they say, yeah, that's great. Maybe I haven't moved to pipelines yet, but I'm in the process of doing it, which is really exciting. And so you can just kind of see, we have pretty much a basic class. This is how we config it. You pass in a little configuration object, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. And then it runs some execution to go out and do it, where basically it's, going out, it's calling an Artifactory API, and then, repeatedly querying and saying, are you done yet? Until it's done, because, doing that scanning can take some time. And we didn't quite want to make it a fully synchronous call, because that can cause other problems. Like, for example, if you have a synchronous call and then you have a network glitch, you lose everything. Whereas this way, if you have a network glitch, it just waits until it can talk to the Artifactory again and moves on. And really, I thought when I started this plan, I thought I was going to have like lots to talk about all the tips and tricks of developing pipeline steps. But Roman assured me, he says, no, there's really just go out and do it. It's actually very easy. So I'm going to kind of skip belaboring that and kind of move on to the pipeline itself and what one looks like. And there we go. So I said it was in 3 acts. So the 3rd act, of course, is the pipeline itself. Also out on GitHub. Not quite as pretty as some of the other GitHubs. I do this demo a fair amount, but I always try to add something new each time I give it, which means that the pipelines tend to be a little hacky. But I actually think this actually in some ways reflects a lot of what the real world is actually like. You hack together a pipeline until it does what you want. And, until, people start reusing it heavily, you probably don't do as much as you should on cleaning it up. And it's still remarkably readable, especially since there was a sad instance with indentation that broke some of my indentation, although I did go back and fix most of it. So what was I implementing? So again, my idea is I wanted 2 pipelines. I want a pipeline that builds the framework and tests the framework. In this particular case, it's only going to test the framework against one application, but presumably you're reusing your framework against many applications, and then you should test it, as I said, either against all of them, which would be the ideal scenario, or against some rational subset of them that you think correctly spans the set of possible failures. And I want an application pipeline that goes out and runs the application and always gets a version of the framework that's known to be good and it's known to work against my application. So again, we're just going to go out and look at the code quickly in GitHub and then look at it in Jenkins. I have to say, by the way, Kosuke kind of mentioned this, but there was a lifesaver here. So I was doing this pipeline transition going up to Jenkins World. And we had previously been doing primarily Maven builds on that Jenkins instance. And now suddenly I'm building, 1 GB Docker images. And realized that I had only allocated my Jenkins 8 GB of disk space. And that Jenkins went down hard. And I was really quite concerned because this was like 2 days before the conference. I really didn't want to have to rebuild it all. But fortunately, I had just switched to the Jenkins file concept in my Git repository. And I was back up and running again in 15 minutes. And that was just sheerly amazing and made me very, very happy. Literally, like, I did a yum install Jenkins, installed a couple of plugins that were recommended, and pointed it back at my Git repository and went. It was just absolutely amazing. Especially since I'm not one of those people that's actually really good with Jenkins. Sad little confession there, or I wasn't. Since I've been working with pipelines, I've gotten there, but before, I was always losing where the buttons were in the UI, or somebody would add a different plugin when I went to a different Jenkins server, and something that I thought I knew how to do, suddenly I couldn't do. I really love this. And I really love these sorts of things Kosuke is talking about of, trying to make, bring some uniformity for the standard use cases. And I think it's a big deal for productivity that we don't actually think about a lot of the time. So let's look at some code. So I have 2 pipelines and then 2 pieces of code, Docker app and Docker framework. And inside each code, there's a little section for the test. And there's a Jenkins file. So up at the front, what am I doing? I am pulling out my Git repository. I'm defining a specific server. I am then using the credentials plugin because I wanted to use some Artifactory APIs that aren't fully done in the plugin. One of the great things about Artifactory is it's very extensive REST API, and we haven't made every single REST API call into a DSL yet. It's a dream. We'll see whether we can manage to add more things to the DSL faster than they add things to the REST API. That's probably going to be hard. I go out, and in here I'm doing a fairly simple Docker build. Really all this one is run a Docker build in this first. Yes?
Can you make the text a bit larger?
Yes. Sorry about that. Is that better? So to do this Docker build, I considered a variety of different ways to do it. I decided to use, to some extent, just to show them off as many features as possible. Of course, if really all I want is a Docker container that runs Tomcat, I don't actually have to build one on my own. Anyways, I maybe have to test it, but I probably don't have to build it myself. But in this case, I'm going to go out and build one myself. So first, I'm going to download from Artifactory the latest version of Tomcat it's got. And I'm going to download the version of Java that goes with it. And then I do a Docker build. Define a tag name to go out to my specific Artifactory server, and just For right now, the tag is just the build number. Putting in various debugging statements. You obviously don't need to have shell scripts to print the working directory or see it if everything is right, but I spent a fair amount of time making things right with shell scripts in Jenkins files, so I like to call out and have it tell me what I did on a fairly regular basis. And then I just say docker.build. And then I'm going to push the tag and push it with a build info and publish the build info. And then I do one final thing. I use the Docker Promote API inside Artifactory to set whatever build I just built and call it the latest build in the dev repository. This isn't a totally ideal workflow, but it's kind of where Docker tags are right now. I have some thoughts on that, but I'll save that for a different talk. And you know, kind of the next step is I do another Docker build. This time, basically mimicking exactly what my application build looks like, except doing it with a dev image instead of a prod image from the framework. And I run the test for my application. In this particular case, all I'm doing is starting my application, proving that it starts, and curling down its homepage. And then I have my new DSL. Fairly simple DSL for X-ray scan. Just a build name, a build number, whether or not I want it to fail to build. This is a snapshot build, and the build wasn't running reliably every single time, so I figured it did run reliably if I hard-coded it to a specific build number. So that's why there's that hack there. You will not actually need that in prod, but this is the joys of doing demos on snapshot builds. It worked 90% of the time. But I have very poor luck when it comes to being out on stage, so I didn't want to take any chances. And then at the end of that, we pass it and we do a promotion. It's good. It's done. We've tested it. It's ready to be used. It's now in prod. And I'm not going to go over the Docker app build at that much depth because as exciting as writing code is, reading other people's code, in my experience, generally is not, unless you are looking for a specific piece of information or are the poor sods stuck debugging it. I spent 5 years in a code maintenance division. So I have spent a lot of time reading other people's code and being stuck debugging it. I have very strong opinions about that sort of thing as a result, but it is what it is. So this Jenkins file is, however, a little bit more complex, and I am just going to mention that it is more complex because at the beginning, I do a Gradle build. And previously, this would have had to have been a completely separate build. There was no real way to do a Gradle build and a Docker build in the same build. And that caused all sorts of gymnastics I had to perform in order to keep the two builds in sync between my Gradle build and my Docker build. And now they're in the same pipeline and nothing I have to worry about. So I have a Gradle build, which is actually a different Git project even. Straight up out of our project examples with a minor variation to give it a prettier homepage. And then the Docker lifecycle scripts, and we build the images, and pretty much it works the same way as we saw before. I build the image, I get the latest version of the WAR file, build the image, and I run a scan with X-ray, then I test and I promote, and at the end, I distribute to Vintray. So that, you know, the idea is that I have enough confidence in my testing that I'm giving it straight to customers at the end of this pipeline. Whether you have that much confidence in your testing is a question each person must answer for themselves. But it's where we all want to be. So, without further ado, let's just quickly run these. Live demos. I am on the right network. Well, maybe we won't. Let's try that again. Okay, that's giving me a little bit more confidence here. I was starting to get a little bit concerned. Okay, jump out to the Jenkins instance. So, we'll do a build now on the framework. And watch it run. So as I said, checking out the Git, pulling down Tomcat and Java, starting a Docker build, and deploying the Docker build, running a test, doing the Docker build for the test based on the last known good version of the Tomcat war file, starting up the test container, waiting a few seconds, pulling down its image, stopping that container, and running an X-ray scan. In this case, I chose, as you may recall, I chose not to fail the build. And so I'm actually just getting this JSON report of everything that X-ray found inside this Docker container.
Can you zoom in once?
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I am.
No worries. Just want to see what it looks like.
And so this, I didn't do it here, but the idea is, this returns as a variable that you can then parse in the JSON parser of your choice and even do something with, or trigger a downstream job or whatever you want to do with it. You have this information handed back into Jenkins, and inside pipelines, you can potentially do some very, very powerful things with that information, scripted right then and there. And then we promote it. And then we see that ever beloved sight of an all green pipeline. Although I will say that since earlier today I was actually looking here, I failed my pipeline. And I never worked so hard to cause a build to fail.
Can't break it.
But and then you run the Docker app, and it's pretty much the same thing. And of course, usually if I wasn't doing demos where I wanted to give myself enough time to catch up and talk, at the end of any Docker framework build, it would immediately go out and say, "Hey, go run the pipeline, all the app pipelines to rebase against the new image." And the image would also, of course, trigger. The app image will also trigger whenever you make a change to the app. And this way, when you're building your Docker containers, you never have to worry about the pipeline getting stuck because of a security vulnerability, or your security vulnerability guy not being able to move forward because the code is broken. They're really two independent tasks that rely on each other. And the only way that this can really get completely jammed up is if the change you have to make to work around the security plugin wouldn't work in the old version of the framework, which is rare. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's rare, and it's not that hard to reprime afterwards. So this is, this sort of thing, and then the build infos that you get in Artifactory, where now I have one build info that gives me all the Gradle modules and all of their dependencies and all of the Docker container and all of the things I pulled into the Docker container, so I can see in one logical place everything I did. This is really where the power of pipelines comes in. I no longer have to worry about trying to trace together different builds. This is the thing I built. It's all in one pipeline. I can build multiple pieces of it separately, see how they succeed and fail. It's very powerful. And I have to say that I've become a huge fan of the pipeline work. And hopefully you also will find your own experiences with pipelines as fun as I've found mine. So with that, before we move into the QA, I just have to, the people who paid for the food wanted me to mention these things. And since they feed me pizza and beer, I feel inclined to oblige them. So first of all, next month's meetup is going to be, the Netflix team is going to come talk to us about Spinnaker. So please come and enjoy it. If you want more information on X-Ray, next week we're doing a webinar of X-Ray and its integration with Aqua Security. And I started this whole thing by telling about a journey that started on getting ready for last year's Swamp Up. Well, that means that this year's Swamp Up is coming. The CFP is open, registration is open. Please, consider both. There's lots of fun things there in the training and everything else. And with that, why doesn't Coach K come back up and let's do a Q&A on the entire thing, either for me or for him or whatever you got. We have to be in front of the whiteboard in order for the camera to pick us up.
So I have a quick question on pipelines. So where do the supported scripts for a pipeline live or no? So I create a Jenkins file that will define a pipeline, and then I have some bash script or some Perl script or whatever. Where do those files get changed into my source control?
So I guess maybe opportunity kind of show the mic.
Yes, yeah, oh, that's right. We have two mics actually. Yes, but John walked away with the other one. So we'll just hold the mic, old-fashioned style.
Yeah, I think we can do this. So I think the question was, well, I got some tools like shell script, the Perl scripts and whatnot to script up of things. And you're telling me that there's this Jenkins file. It's also kind of like a scripting to help you define automation. Where is the boundary? Is that the question? Right. So I think the way I think of it is things you can define the shell script and stuff that you want to run from your laptop and so on. They should remain in shell script. Right? I think of Jenkins file more as an extension of coordinating Jenkins jobs. So things that choreograph around different machines, running stuff in parallel. Something that something that captures what you be doing as a flow of things. That in my mind goes to Jenkins file.
Right, but in the source control system, I'll have the Jenkins file that defines a pipeline, right? So in the same place where I have the Jenkins files, can I then check in the supported?
That's certainly what I did.
Yeah. I mean, your build script. Okay, so the question is, if I have this shell script, where do I put it? You tell me Jenkins file in the repository. Where do I put my build of the sets, test of the sets, and it's in the same place.
The same place.
Yeah.
So Jenkins file can have many other files that it uses.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
One of my favorite build step is the System Groovy build step. So I do a lot of System Groovy because I don't like writing plugins, and I like having access to the JVM and doing introspection on the build queue and checking nodes that have gone offline or not. Can I do System Groovy in pipeline?
So the question was, the Groovy plugin has this awesome feature called system Groovy script where you can basically run whatever script inside Jenkins VM. It's like an ultimate weapon that you can destroy yourself. It's like fixing the engine in the airplane while it's flying feature. So is that compatible with pipeline? That's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I have in the slide, I have this link up called compatibility.md. So there's a list of the markdown page that lists all the non-compatible plugins. So I check there. But yeah, I don't know for sure. Sorry.
Can I configure a complete new Jenkins instance as a pipeline and configure Jenkins using a pipeline?
Right. So the question is, can I configure? So I suspect your question is, I want to. So you tell me Jenkins file can be put into the version control system. I like the idea of putting configuration in Git. Can I do the same with Jenkins configuration? Like, can I bootstrap the whole Jenkins instance entirely from source tree? So the answer is not quite there. I have this the research project going. It's called the System Config DSL, which kind of takes the same idea of job DSL plugin, but into the system configuration. So you could say things like, I need these plugins. I want to define these jobs and these views. These are build agent. And the job DSL plugin works with the pipeline, so that you can define. Say, here's my GitHub org. Define another part of job DSL. So by combining those three things, I think we can get there. But the one piece that I mentioned is still like a research hack, so I don't recommend you to use it just yet.
I was going to say, you can kind of get by with doing it with Puppet or Ansible or something like that, running from a job as well.
Right. By the way, he's Patrick Wolf, and he's the product manager that looks after the Jenkins open source project. So, so just so that other people know you. So what he was saying, just for the people, for the recording purposes, was, what were you saying?
Since you can puppetize.
Right, thank you. Yeah.
Ansible.
So the Puppet has a Jenkins module. Chef has a Jenkins scripter. Ansible, I don't know for sure, but these existing configuration management tools have certain support for the things I just mentioned. So they can be used today. Yes, that works today.
We're back. Since Jenkins 2 has come out, how quick is the adoption been? Do you still see a lot of people on the first V1?
So the question was, what was the adoption like when the Jenkins 2 launched? We actually tracked that with some great interest, and I lost track after it reached the 50% or so. So usually, there's from data we know about half the people upgrade. About half the user base is running the release that came out within the last 6 weeks. So right now, I don't have the latest data, but when I was looking at this, maybe October, for the Jenkins world, it's about at that point, it was more or less around that, a half-ish rate. There's also a large number of people who never seem to upgrade Jenkins. I know who you are. I think of them as basically like a lost cause. They're a group of people who never upgrade unless something is wrong.
But you're saying that there's backwards compatibility. So if you have like a Jenkins setup with certain plugins and stuff, if you upgrade to Jenkins 2, that most likely most of it will work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So initially, right after the release, I saw a little bit of hesitation, but then after a month or two, it basically became normal.
The pipeline you mentioned shared libraries. Is that the same thing that Scribbler does?
The pipeline plugin I discussed about the shared library capability. It's not the same. How does it relate to the Scribbler plugin, which is another thing that's done by this Swiss German guy? The answer is they're completely two separate systems, have nothing to do with each other. I'm sorry. That's what happens when you have people writing scratching their own image.
When I do Docker push, where does the credentials of the artifact reside in the pipeline?
So you set them when you set your Artifactory credentials. So up at the top, you can pull a credential from the credentials plugin and assign it to an Artifactory server, and then you assign that Docker to that Artifactory server. So up at the top of the pipeline, usually you do it. In my particular pipeline, I reset it a couple of times just to prove that I could, but you don't actually need to.
guess that
That's it.
pretty much wraps up.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.